Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing. Tonight we're going to be talking about Javante Tank Davis's recent comments directed towards Artur Beterbiev, and of course we're going to be talking about some other issues that have popped up recently. Example: the IBF mandating Beterbiev to face his mandatory, and other information. So stay tuned to that. We're going to have a great show. Remember to leave your comments in the comment section below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much. Welcome back. So, Beterbiev's trainer was asked in an interview, I can't remember specifically who it was with, about Javante Tank Davis. And if at this point in his career, did Scully think that Davis would qualify for the Hall of Fame? Obviously, it's premature to be talking about Javante Tank Davis's career right now because he's still just turning 30 years old. Obviously, potentially has 5, 6, maybe 7 years left on his career. Maybe. We don't know how motivated Tank Davis is and how long he's planning on fighting. So, we have to wait and see how his career unfolds, obviously. Um, but obviously, Scully was just asked a question. And based on Tank Davis's present career, his resume, and his accomplishments, it's obvious that he isn't a Hall of Famer at this point of his career. Some people like to pretend that he's a three-weight world champion, but Javante Davis is not a three-weight world champion. He's a two-weight world champion. And he was just elevated to super champion at 135 pounds because Devin Haney moved up to 140. Otherwise, at that point, he was still just considered a one-weight world champion. Obviously, I think he's been a champion at 130 3 times, right? Obviously, he lost one of his titles on the scale, I think, one time. The next time he moved up in weight to move down. And who can keep track? But needless to say, even the second time he won the 130-pound title, he beat the regular champion and was elevated to super champion, even though another guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, Mercado, right, a Puerto Rican kid, hard puncher, he beat the super champion. And he was demoted to regular champion. So there's this switch-aroo where Tank Davis became the super champion, obviously because of the PBC's relationship to the WBA, where he has been gifted quite a bit. But when we look at Tank Davis, it's been over 7 years now where he's been in conversation to unify titles, fight top-level competition. And we know that basically the PBC and Floyd Mayweather stopped him from doing that and sort of do what Floyd Mayweather made a career of when he moved to 147 pounds, fighting Mexican or Latin opponents to try to sell pay-per-views. They tried to create a pay-per-view star with Wilder, Spence, and Tank Davis. Yet they were unsuccessful with Spence, unsuccessful with Wilder, and the most success they've had is with Tank Davis, who now obviously has left Floyd Mayweather. And at that point, we thought, oh, good, now maybe we're going to be able to get the bigger and better fights, because of course it was all Floyd Mayweather's fault that Tank Davis's career was held back. See, this is what Tank Davis fanboys fail to tell you, right? They don't want to talk about how Floyd Mayweather is blamed for holding Tank Davis back, right? Yet Floyd Mayweather is on record multiple times offering big fights to Tank Davis that he turned down because he felt that Floyd Mayweather was basically selling him down the river, right? Trying to put him in a position to get beat. They even felt that way when Floyd Mayweather put him in with Petraza. They felt it was a similar situation where Floyd was rushing them into a world title fight against a guy that he was just looking to get them beat. Of course, they ended up winning that fight, and Tank Davis was born. But people fail to tell you all the truth and the ins and outs of what really goes on in boxing. Whether it's they're too ignorant to know the truth, or they'd rather push some false narrative, right, which is probably more to the truth. I was listening to a Dante's Boxing Nation video, and of course he does what he does. He deflected. Scully talking about Tank Davis not being a Hall of Famer has nothing to do with race. It was a question asked, and he answered it. I'm sure you could ask him a bunch of questions similar to Mexican and Asian and Caucasian fighters, and he would have this similar response to what they've done and accomplished at this point of his career. Because what he went on to do was say that, in this era, a lot of fighters who don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame have been elevated into the Hall of Fame. And he didn't want to name names because obviously that would be disrespectful. But he talked about a lot of these guys aren't at the level, and he went through a whole spew of great Black American fighters. Ollie, Leonard, obviously Sugar Ray Robinson, Hammer and Hank Armstrong, and a few others, right? All Black Americans. So this wasn't a race-based comment. It was just an opinion based on a guy who was an ex-fighter and has been in the game for a long time, right? An expert, you would say. And of course, what did Dante do? He did what he always does. He made it into a racial topic, right? And then used a bunch of non-Black fighters who've been praised by old media to try to show how Tank Davis should be more praised and should be ranked higher on the pound-for-pound list. The problem with ranking Tank Davis higher on the pound-for-pound list now, right, is because the current top guys in the pound-for-pound list are fucking super accomplished, right? That's the problem. How do you justify Tank Davis being above guys like Usyk, Crawford, Anui, and Beterbiev, all who've done far more than him? And then Canelo Alvarez at number 5, who's done way more than him, right? If you put Tank Davis like I do at number 6, then, I mean, you can justify him there or a few places below, but he's not a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter because he's never unified. He hasn't beat any elite fighters, pound-for-pound guys, or world champions, right? He won 1 title from Petraza at champion, beat Leo Santa Cruz, who was a champion, even though it's the belt he had that he gave up to move up to face fucking whoever, whatever, for a regular baby belt, only to come back down to fight for the real belt. So you fought for the belt that you had, that you gave up to beat a guys that you could sell a pay-per-view for, which is what it was. Marketing, created, not manufactured. That's the word that comes to mind when you talk about Tank Davis's career. And this doesn't diminish Tank Davis as an athlete or a boxer. I think he's great. The problem is, it's not about what I think. It's about what you prove. And at this point, he's failed to prove anything. I mean, of course, John Boxing will say, well, you didn't mind that Golovkin, blah, 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 blah. The difference with Golovkin is Golovkin literally was chasing every single every single champion in his weight division through fucking a long period of time, where there's like literally about 8 to 10 world champions who blatantly ducked him. Canelo Alvarez literally dropped his title to duck and avoid him. Can you imagine? Remember when Leo Santa Cruz ducked and dropped titles to avoid Rigo? Remember the big pushback towards that, right? For Rigo. But you don't get that kind of pushback for Golovkin, because most of the people who fanboy for Rigo are anti-Golovkin because of the race situation. It's all based on race, because the scenarios are the same. Leo Santa Cruz blatantly ducked Rigo, dropped his titles, moved to another weight class, and was told by his promoter, Al Heyman, to duck and avoid Rigo. People don't talk about that either. It's always Bob Arum and Top Rank that ruined Rigo's career. But yet the people that stopped big fights from getting made were the PBC and Al Heyman. Top Rank gave Rigo the big fights, right? He won one, he lost one. But this is consistently the kind of narratives we see pushed from people like Dante or JB. I mean, I'm sure JB is going to come out and talk about how, Tank Davis is being unfairly criticized because of his hateful comment towards Beterbiev. Beterbiev, his legacy already is cemented. He's considered already one of the top 10 light heavyweights of all time by, most people, and maybe even top 5. He's done something that nobody's done since Roy Jones. And even when Roy Jones did it, he wasn't the lineal champion because he didn't fight Darius Michalczewski. So the last guy who was unified, undisputed, and lineal was Michael Spinks. So how many years do you have to go back before that was done? That's literally what Beterbiev has done. Adonis Stevenson didn't do it. Kovalev didn't do it. Andre Ward didn't do it. Right? There's a number of elite, top, pound for pound quality fighters who didn't do what Beterbiev has done. Right? So we'll get into that in a second. But this is the kind of deflection you always see, right? Of course, it's a black fighter who's being not criticized, because Scully wasn't criticizing him. He was just saying, at this point, what he's done doesn't qualify him for the Hall of Fame. That's true. I think 95% of people with any real boxing knowledge would agree to that, right? They would sign off on that statement. But of course, Tank did what we see tons of black American YouTubers consistently do: make it about race, and then make it about the non-black fighter, Beterbiev, right? To disrespect him. But what did Beterbiev have to do with Scully's comments? Nothing. And Scully's comments weren't negative or hateful towards Tank Davis. But let's get to this, and you can see for yourself, make up your own mind how you feel with this topic. If you haven't heard it, you can go check it out. But Gervonta Davis trashes Artur Beterbiev. And it's ironic, because how stupid do you look trashing a guy who just had a fantastic performance against a fucking pound for pound quality fighter in a unification fight? First of all, Tank Davis has never had a unification fight, and he's never fought a pound for pound top fighter, especially a guy with the kind of victory that Bivol has, beating guys like Zurdo Ramirez and Canelo Alvarez, right? So it's not just a guy who had a title and you unified against him, like let's say a George Kambosos, right? This was Bivol beating pound for pound quality fighters in Canelo Alvarez, right? When we talk about quality of resume, that's the epitome of quality of resume. But let's move forward. So Gervonta Tank Davis criticized newly crowned undisputed light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev, saying he's not a Hall of Famer and he's ass. This was a response to his coach, John Scully, who said that Gervonta Davis would not be a Hall of Famer bound if he retired now. If he retired now. There's a lot of fighters right now who people think would not be a Hall of Famer. Some fighters that are potential Hall of Famers, people still act like they're not, like Lomachenko, right? People actually think Canelo Alvarez as well. Like, that's how deluded some people are, you know. But you got guys like Usyk, Inouye, Bud Crawford, Lomachenko, you know, Canelo Alvarez. These guys are certainly Hall of Famers, and they've all done leaps and bounds more than Gervonta Tank Davis. Just because you don't like them as much as you like Tank Davis, that doesn't have anything to do with the accomplishments, the resume, right? Literally, I saw someone praising Tank Davis for the number of champions he's beaten, just like the same guy praised Deontay Wilder for number of title defenses Deontay Wilder made. Yet this guy hates on Golovkin, right? Who fought more title defenses than Wilder, and unified 2 different times as a middleweight champion. But yet Wilder is praised and Golovkin is hated, right? Golovkin was ducked by every single champion at 160 pounds. Wilder ducked every single champion at heavyweight. That's a clear difference, right? When you're comparing people's resume and accomplishments. With Gervonta Tank Davis, right now you have Devin Haney, who's 4 years younger than him, who's a far more accomplished fighter than Gervonta Tank Davis. I think Gervonta Tank Davis is a better fighter, and I think he would knock out Devin Haney. But Devin Haney's fought for more world titles, has become undisputed, moved up to become a legitimate 2-weight world champion by beating a legitimate champion to get that title. He wasn't elevated by the WBA from regular to super champion, right? He's fought unification fights. He's fought pound-for-pound fighters like Lomachenko. Whether you think he won or lost, he still fought them. Just like Golovkin fought Canelo Alvarez, right? You know, people have taken on high-level opponents. You know, the irony is now somebody's praising Gervonta Tank Davis for his victory over Ryan Garcia. Yet that guy's on record shitting all over Ryan Garcia and talking about him being a low-end opponent. He said that both when Ryan Garcia was an opponent for Tank Davis, and then he said the same thing when Ryan Garcia was an opponent for Devin Haney. So now you want to highlight those fights, even though at the time you were one of the few people diminishing the fights, acting like Ryan Garcia didn't deserve opportunities like that, even though he is a big money draw. And that's why he got the fights, specifically because he was beatable and a big money draw. Perfect. The underlying message that Scully appeared to be getting at with his comment about Baltimore native Tank Davis, 30-0, 28 KOs, not getting into the Hall of Fame if he retired today, was that he's not ambitious. And this comes as a shock to nobody. He's never showed any ambition at all. What he's been taught from day one from Floyd Mayweather is that easy work, big money, right? That's the way that we're going to move you. We're going to put you in easy fights and generate a lot of money for you, a lot of money for your promoter, right? And primarily, that's what we're going to do with your career, right? No ambition to unify. Never did he try to unify against any of the champions at 130 pounds. And there was 3 or 4 of them that were champions during that time, and not just Lomachenko. If you didn't want to step up and face Lomachenko, because obviously he was too good at that weight class and primed, you could have fought a multitude of other guys, like Tevin Farmer and others, right, who definitely were not on Lomachenko's era, guys that literally ducked Lomachenko. You could have fought them for unification, but you didn't. This is a guy who missed weight at 130, moved up to 135, had to do weigh-in twice in the Gamboa fight, right? Struggling to make weight because of his lack of ambition. There's no other way you can chop this up. The guy is happy to get paid millions of dollars, but he's not really too interested in building a great legacy. And is that boxing fans' fault, or is that his fault? And if you show this kind of lack of ambition, do you think boxing fans should give you a pass and pat you on the back and say, I love you anyway? So that's the way people are supposed to treat you. Every sport in the world, if you show no ambition, fans criticize you, whether we're talking about English Premier League football, baseball, hockey, NBA, NFL, it doesn't fucking matter. If you don't show ambition, fans are going to be critical of you. So this is Tank Davis's career summed up in 5 little statements. Use of catch weights. Sure, he's not the only person that used catch weights. They're going to say Canelo Alvarez. They never say Sugar Ray Leonard, of course, but you know who started it all. And I'm a Leonard fan. So I'm just pointing out that fact that Leonard is the one who really started the whole catch weight situation. But okay. So Canelo did it too. What does that have to do with fucking Tank Davis? Canelo Alvarez also fought elite level fighters in his career, moved up 4 weight divisions, became undisputed, and unified at multiple weight classes. So it's easy to say, well, Tank Davis is doing the same thing Canelo did, but he's not, because he's never unified. He's never moved up 4 weight divisions. He never became undisputed. He's never fought pound for pound quality fighters. So what has he done outside of catch weights that's similar to fucking Canelo Alvarez? Selective matchmaking. Well, we know that's true because when he was under Floyd Mayweather, everybody fucking said that. Everybody, right? People gave Tank Davis a pass because they acted as if he wasn't in control of his career. It was all Floyd Mayweather's doing. Floyd Mayweather is the one that was maneuvering him and putting him in selective matchmaking. Yet he's doing the same thing now that he's been doing consistently. At 130 pounds, he was pulling up 126-pound fighters. Cuellar, Santa Cruz was going to pull up, Abner Mares, but his fucked up eye stopped that from happening. Pulled up Ruiz, right? All guys from 126, Ruiz from 122. Remember when Lomachenko pulled up Mariaga as a replacement opponent for Salido? He was crucified for fighting a guy coming up from 126. But Tank Davis has done it 4 fucking times. 4. And now at 135, he's doing it for the second time. bringing up another fighter once again from 130 pounds. He did it, of course, with Garcia. Now he's doing it with fucking Lamont Roach, right? Number 3, weak opposition. Like when you want to talk about the best fighters on Tank Davis's resume, you go back all the way to Petraza, a guy that was weight drained at that weight, who was struggling to make weight. We know that. Paulie Malignaggi went on record to fucking tell you that, to say that he was on the inside. He knew Petraza only stayed away for that payday. Otherwise, he was going to move up to 135 pounds, right? And we see what Petraza did when he moved up. Moved up, became a world champion at 135. Moved up to 140 and was one of the top fighters in the weight class. Wasn't able to get over the hurdle against the naturally bigger fighters, but was still in fights with fucking everybody, right? And then people criticized Keyshawn Davis for fighting him. You're shit. JB did it, right? You're shitting on a young up-and-coming fighter like Keyshawn Davis for fighting a guy who tried to become a 3-weight world champion, has a great resume, been in the ring with everybody. Why wouldn't you fight him? It's a great opponent. But this is the kind of delusional fans, that love to spit fucking narratives consistently. Then we get to number 4, content to hold content to hold secondary titles. Yeah, Gervonta Davis is the only boxer in boxing history to become a 3-weight world champion with secondary titles. He was a secondary title holder at 130, 135, and 140. Never in the history of boxing has that happened before. That goes back to lack of ambition. Never interested in winning the legitimate titles. More interested in doing fake titles that the PBC could market as world championship fights, because most fucking casual fans don't know the difference between a fucking regular title and a super title. And the irony is Golovkin, of course, was shit on because he defended his WBA regular title fucking 20-something times. Obviously, it became a super title after he beat Daniel Giel. But prior to that, obviously, it was the German fighter, what's-his-face, who had that title and refused to actually fight Golovkin for fucking years, which is ultimately why Golovkin left Germany and his German promoter to come to the States, because it was the same promoter as that guy who they refused to put him in the ring with. Right? But Golovkin gets criticized because he was a regular champion. But people ignore that when they talk about Gervonta Tank Davis, once again showing you their blatant bias. And then number 5, no unification fights. We know in the modern era, if you're going to fight the best fighters in your weight class, that's going to mean you're fighting world champions, because generally the best fighters are going to be the guys holding out titles, right? You look at lightweight right now. You have Keyshawn, Lomachenko, Tank Davis. 3 of the top 5 fighters in boxing from that division all hold world titles. So the only way you can fight another elite fighter is if you unify. You could fight Zepeda, who's obviously a top 5 fighter as well, and probably Keyshawn Davis, who probably is above the WBO champion, really, and number 5 on that list, right? But of course, he hasn't really made a name for himself. He hasn't won that title yet. When he wins the WBO title, then it's going to be the same scenario, right? So it's very seldom you're able to fight a ranked opponent who's considered one of the best. Usually it's the other champions that are the best. When Spence was champion and Crawford were champions, they were easily the 2 best fighters at welterweight. But that the only way you're going to have them fight was for unification, right? Like Bivol and Beterbiev. So here's the statement he made, Tank Davis. The big-ass goofy that he trained is not a Hall of Famer fighter, and he's ass, said Gervonta Tank Davis on X, taking a verbal shot at undisputed light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev in response to his coach John Scully saying that Tank Davis was not a Hall of Fame fighter if he hung up his gloves at this point of his career. Well, the reality is if Beterbiev hung up his gloves right now and Gervonta Tank Davis hung up his gloves right now, the one guy that would probably be a Hall of Famer would be Beterbiev, an undefeated, undisputed light heavyweight champion with names like Bivol, Smith, Vosdick, yard on his resume. He's won world titles from undefeated world champions, Gvozdyk and Bivol, two unbeaten world champions that he beat to win world titles. Gvozdyk was just coming off of a fantastic performance beating Adonis Stevenson, the same Adonis Stevenson Andre Ward ducked, right? Bivol was coming off of wins against Zerto, who's currently a cruiserweight world champion, and Canelo Alvarez, who at the time was considered pound for pound number one by most pundits in boxing before Bivol beat him or exposed him. You can't say any of that about Tank Davis. Oh, Tank Davis is a bigger draw. Oh, he makes more money. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But you don't get into the Hall of Fame because you sell more pay-per-views. You get into the Hall of Fame because you're seen as the best fighter in boxing, in your weight division. You move up through multiple weight divisions, fighting the best opponents available to you. He's not doing that and never has. So some people believe Tank Davis is a manufactured fighter designed to make money, just like Errol Spence, just like Deontay Wilder. But he's not tested against the best. His management has selected his opposition like scientists, matching him exclusively against fighters who are sure things for him and who he couldn't possibly lose to. We know that's true because he's never been an underdog in any of the fights he had. Never. And wherever there's a possible test, he found ways to maneuver away from it. Ducking Lomachenko for 7 years, right? Not fighting Devin Haney when he was the undisputed champion at 135 pounds. When Shakur Stevenson was just a free agent now, not making him an offer he couldn't refuse in a super fight that would have filled his pockets full of far more cash than he could have got to sign with fucking Matchroom. He didn't do it. He should have, because that would have been huge. And right now, we'd be talking completely different about Tank Davis. We'd be praising him like we praise other great fighters in boxing for doing what he had to do to get a big fight. But he didn't do it. And now he's fighting Lamont Roach on pay-per-view, a fight no one gives a fuck about because nobody even knows who Lamont Roach is. Nobody's even seen Lamont Roach's last fight, which was on Pro Box. That tells you everything you need to know, right? There has been no 50-50 fights for Tank. He's never faced anyone where he was the underdog. When he was the opportunity to fight Vasily Lomachenko 7 years ago in 2017, when he was called out, he chose not to. It was only after Lomachenko turned 37 years old and had been beaten a couple of times in recent years that Tank finally agreed to fight him. Exactly. Right? This is the epitome of what Tank Davis and his promoter at the time, Floyd Mayweather, said they were going to do. Age Lomachenko out. And that's what they did. And now you still want to get credit after 7 years of aging a fighter out. Everybody knows Lomachenko was at his best at 130. That's when he was fucking the Matrix, where he was embarrassing fucking elite fighters, making them quit pulling no Mosses, no Moschenko. He's never been as dominant at 135 as he was at 130. So here's Artur Beterbiev's resume. So this is what he's done in 2018. Faced an undefeated Callum Smith, faced Kalajic, who was 24-1, a guy literally we just saw face David Morrell. David Morrell wasn't able to do what Beterbiev did to him in 2019, which was KO him, right? Morrell just fought him, and people said Morrell was exposed. Exposed. He fought Gvozdyk, who was an undefeated world unified champion, coming off of an Adonis Stevenson victory, knockout victory, sending Adonis Stevenson into the hospital. Luckily, Adonis has recovered and fine. He's fine right now. Gvozdyk retired after that fight. And only after 3-4 years of retirement and losing all his money, he chose to come back. And of course, that is the version that David Benavidez fought and wasn't able to stop him. Yet Gvozdyk was fucking stopped, destroyed, humiliated, retired by Beterbiev. Then he faced, what everyone had to deal with during COVID. Adam DNS, maybe he was a mandatory, I can't remember. 19-1-1, not a big name opponent, but he did exactly what he had to do with that guy, destroyed him and moved on. To Marcus Brown, a PBC fighter that I don't forget, JB, you said was the best light heavyweight in boxing, and was praising him, throwing pundits at him, throwing out tons of praise for him because, of course, he's black and American, right? And you can't say that, of course, Beterbiev never fought a slick, great black American. Marcus Brown was an Olympian, right? Just like fucking Demetrius Andrade. And Marcus Brown not only fucking got knocked out in that fight, but fucking he opened a huge cut on Beterbiev's head from a headbutt. And Beterbiev was still able to fight through that and knock him out to keep his titles, right? Joe Smith Jr. obviously had been beaten by Bivol, but Bivol didn't knock him out. Joe Smith Jr. fought fucking Beterbiev. Beterbiev fucking destroyed him. Destroyed him. I think it was 2 or 3 rounds. Destroyed him. Then he faced Anthony Yarde. This is the same Anthony Yarde that obviously fought Kovalev. Was this close to beating Kovalev, right? Really, it looked like he had Kovalev, but he shot his gas tank. Kovalev came out the next round, obviously being the more experienced fighter, obviously a good boxer with a great jab, and was able to stop Anthony Yarde. Yarde was very young at that point, and obviously, was beaten by the more experienced fighter, but showed the natural tools and physicality, so much so that even the LDBC like Anthony Yarde. And generally, they hate UK fighters, but they liked Anthony Yarde because he ticked all the boxes. Yarde ended up losing to a domestic level British fighter afterwards. Obviously, this happens sometimes when you come off a knockout. You're just, confidence-wise, not back to where you were. Then he stepped in and faced Beterbiev and fought fucking great. Fought great until he was knocked out by Beterbiev. Then Beterbiev fought Callum Smith, the same Callum Smith who lost to Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, who some people say he had a torn bicep in that fight, which is one reason why he underperformed in that fight. Yet Canelo Alvarez wasn't able to destroy him the way Beterbiev destroyed him. And this was Callum Smith, who moved up to light heavyweight and was fucking waxing dudes, looking great. His left hook looked dynamite. Leading into this fight with Beterbiev, shitloads of people were picking Smith to win. The fight obviously happened in Smith's backyard in the UK as well. So Beterbiev actually had to fight on the road in hostile territory against a taller, naturally, I don't know, physically bigger, but a big dude, right? Broad and a huge left hook, and destroyed him in that fight. Only to then fight Bivol, the unbeaten fighter, world champion for undisputed unification fight, a fight people have been looking forward to quite a few years now. A guy coming off of victories beating Canelo Alvarez, beating Zurdo Ramirez, right? And those wins have fucking aged well. Aged well. And Beterbiev went in there and, from what I saw, beat Bivol and deserved the victory, regardless of what some haters may say, right? That's what he's done since 2018. Because people say, Tank Davis is 30, this guy's like 9 years older. That has nothing to do with anything. We know that Beterbiev was in the amateurs and the Russians for a long time, like many Europeans are. They spent a long time in the amateurs because when they grew up, amateur boxing was the only opportunity they had. They could not become pros under communist Russia. Obviously, Beterbiev became a pro and has fucking been great. Was undefeated with 100% KO ratio until running into Bivol, just to show you how great Bivol was. Here's Tank Davis and what he's done in 2028 since 2018. He faced Jesus Andres Cuellar, a fighter that had just lost at 126 pounds to Abner Mares and pulled him up to 130, coming off of a loss in a bigger weight class. Then fought Hugo Reyes, a guy that pulled from 122. Then faced Ricardo Nunez. Yes, of course you don't know who he is. Nobody does. Then moved up to 135 to fight Gamboa, who at this time was irrelevant. Hadn't done anything in years. The last time people really talked about Gamboa was 8 years earlier when he got knocked out by Bud Crawford. He wasn't even ranked by the WBA. But of course, he was elevated by the WBA into the rankings when they knew that Tank Davis was going to move up to fight for their regular WBA title. Then he moved up to 140 to fight another regular champion in Mario Barros, a guy who'd never beaten a top 10 fucking 140-pound fighter. Then he moved down to fight Isaac Cruz as a replacement opponent for Rolly Romero. Rolly fucking Romero. A bum-ass opponent who's pure garbage. Cruz, nobody knew who he was, already had a loss, surprised everybody by going the distance with Tank Davis. And that was victory for him, that he was able to go the distance. Then went on to beat Rolly Romero to win a title and then lose it the first time he faced somebody who's not even great in Rayo. Then he faced Rolly Romero, the fight that Al Heyman and them were always pushing for because Rolly Romero is hated and they knew people would pay to watch him get knocked out, which they did. Then he faced Hector Luis Garcia, a guy they pulled up from 130. Then they faced Ryan Garcia. Out of every name I mentioned, easily the best fighter that Gervonta Tank Davis has fought. Yet this was a 140-pound fighter that was pulled down to a catch weight and then slapped with a rehydration clause, so he couldn't come in fully healthy. And that showed. You saw how skinny he looked in the Tank Davis fight compared to how he looked in the Devin Haney fight, right? No rehydration clause, able to fucking put back all your weight, not pulled down in weight, obviously fighting, I think, above 140 in that fight. And it showed a much stronger version compared to the version that fought Tank Davis. But still, that was a fight people praised Tank Davis for because we knew why he did it. It was like Floyd Mayweather fighting Conor McGregor. It made money, so it made sense. So people give him a pass. Even though as far as the quality of opponent, come on. Come on. You're fighting a fucking social media person. It's like fighting Jake Paul. Then you face Frank Martin, a guy who probably, truthfully, is the best fighter you faced. The best since you faced Petraza, right? Obviously, Santa Cruz is a good name. But, you know, Santa Cruz right there, we know who he was. He was in his fourth weight division. He had no power fucking at any of the other divisions. So we knew he had no power to keep Tank Davis off of him at 130 pounds. And it showed. Santa Cruz was outboxing him, beating him, landing more punches. But ultimately, he could not fucking contend with Tank Davis's power and got fucking knocked out. That was no surprise. Not to fucking anybody. But it was, of course, Tank Davis's first pay-per-view because he was manufactured, putting in with a Mexican fighter to sell a pay-per-view to get the Mexican-American fan base. Just like Errol Spence fighting fucking, what's his face? Fucking Garcia. Right? Then you face Martin, and I said, Martin probably the best fighter out of this whole resume. The problem is Martin was a 28-year-old fucking contender who'd never beat a top 10 lightweight and then was rushed into a fight with Tank Davis, ducked Shakur Stevenson to go in to get knocked out by Tank Davis in a fight where people literally say he fucking was struggling to make weight. And it kind of looked that way. We'll see what he does when he bounces back, if he comes back at 135 or 140. If he comes back at 140, that pretty much tells you the tale, that he had outgrown that weight and was struggling at that weight, which was probably why he didn't look great on the scale. He looked great in the ring, but didn't look great on the scale. And then, of course, Lamont Roche. So you think about everyone here and you think, who did he beat to win a title? The only fighter here that he beat to win a title, a legitimate title, not a regular title, but a legitimate title, was Leo Santa Cruz. Leo Santa Cruz, who'd come up from 126, fought some bum-ass fucking opponent, went the distance with him, wasn't able to fucking look great in the fight, which kind of killed the buzz for the pay-per-view because they were hoping Santa Cruz was going to go in there, smoke that dude, and then the fucking hype behind the Santa Cruz Tank Davis fight would have really been elevated. But unfortunately, Santa Cruz looked like shit against that fighter. If you don't believe me, go back and watch the fight. And then tell me he looked good. He looked like garbage, right? But still, they had to make the fight because that was the way they were going to create Tank Davis into a pay-per-view star. So you force feed him Santa Cruz. And here you are. Santa Cruz is the guy he beat, even though he never really legitimate won a title. He was gifted a vacant title by the guy who came down to then beat you to regain his title. So, how significant was that? Not fucking significant at all. And there's no other champions from 2018, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. 7 fucking years. No Lomachenko, no Devin Haney, no Teofimo Lopez, no fucking Shakur Stevenson. No unification fights with any 130-pound champions. No move up to 140 to win a legitimate 140-pound title. We know he was going to move up to 140 if Isaac Cruz fucking beat Rayo, right? So he could become a legitimate 3-way world champion by beating fucking Isaac Cruz in a rematch. Because, of course, Isaac Cruz is not big, so he would feel comfortable going to 140 to take on Isaac Cruz, right? And imagine how embarrassing that would have been when you say you won't fight this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy at 140 because you're not comfortable at that weight. But then you go up to 140 and fight Isaac Cruz. He's lucky that Isaac Cruz got beat because that would have been fucking embarrassing to go against everything you'd been saying through social media to only fucking contradict yourself. But, let's move past that and talk about some legitimate fighters, guys who potentially could be considered pound for pound. So Dmitry Bivol's team puts in this protest with all the sanctioning bodies, the same thing that Vasily Lomachenko did after the Devin Haney fight. You went to the sanctioning bodies and you petitioned them to keep you as the number one mandatory, which is why obviously he ended up getting the IBF world title fight, because he petitioned the sanctioning bodies based on the close competitive fight he had with Devin Haney, which 9 times out of 10 would have led to a rematch. Of course, Devin Haney ducked that rematch with Lomachenko to move up and face Regis Prograis at 140, right? So then, of course, what happened is then Shakur got a vacant title, Lomachenko got a vacant title, Tank Davis got a vacant title, and Lomachenko's countryman got a vacant title. This is what Bivol was doing here, so that he would guarantee himself the rematch with Beterbiev, which he deserves, fucking 100%. Every single boxing fan, unless they're fucking David Benavidez fanboys, Canelo haters, wants to see Beterbiev Bivol in a rematch. Only a small fucking diluted American segment of the boxing public literally wants to see Beterbiev fight fucking David Benavidez. He didn't even beat fucking Morale yet, so slow your roll. Let him fucking fight his in-house PBC fight before you start talking about him trying to do something great. Because at this point of his career, he's no different than Tank Davis. He never tried to fucking unify. He's never tried to do anything great in his fucking career. Bivol did. So he deserves the opportunity. And he fought great in that fight. And this is the guy, of course, that the IBF has mandated as Beterbiev's mandatory. And see, this goes back to something JB said recently when he was shitting on Nakatani for fighting his mandatory and saying, oh, he's fought garbage opponents. Well, here you go. Another guy who fought garbage opponents. Outside of 45-year-old Jean Pascal, he beat a guy that was 7-10. You got some guys here with good records, 17-0, 20-0. But who did they face? Nobody. 14-0 beat you. 14-0 beat you. Like, literally, there's not a fucking name on this resume that anybody's ever heard of, right? Never. Outside of Jean Pascal, who he beat by unanimous decision. An old-ass Jean Pascal that just couldn't cut off the ring and catch up to the younger, more elusive German fighter. This guy who's got no power and already lost to a fucking mediocre fucking domestic-level European fighter. But they act like this is a fight that should be made. But yet this guy hasn't faced any top 15 fucking IBF fighters. If you want to be the IBF mandatory, I don't mind. People say, oh, a lot of the big names don't go to the IBF. Ring IQ was talking about this today because of the next day rehydration clause protocol for the IBF. Well, that may be true. So then what you should have to do is beat fucking at least 2 or 3 guys ranked in the top 15, right? Something William Skull didn't do, something that Thai fighter that fucking Nakatani didn't do, and something fucking Effort didn't have to do. Unlike fucking Daniel Dubois, who literally had to beat legitimate competition to earn an opportunity through the IBF to fight for a world title. See, and that's why people praise Daniel Dubois But then they shit on these kind of opposition, this kind of opponents. William Skull, another fighter in Germany. What does the IBF have fucking together with German promoters that they consistently still push German fighters into these positions, even though these guys aren't even fucking known in Germany? If I talk to my German friends, nobody knows who this fucking guy is. Literally nobody. And nobody knows who William Skull is. And I know quite a few people in Germany. But I guarantee you, none of them have heard of these guys because in Germany, these guys are not known. So if you want to talk about them fighting big international fights, how are you going to sell it? How are you going to market it? How does it make fucking sense? It doesn't. And it's ironic that when Charlo and Spence were in power of the IBF title, the IBF didn't mandate them to fight their mandatory European fucking domestic level opponents. Murtazaliev, who's now a champion, was mandatory for 4 years for Charlo, right? What's his name? Arga Kakakov, right? You know, Malaysian, Ukrainian fighter, Uzbekistani fighter, who was Errol Spence's mandatory, right? And then got beat by the Canadian guy. And the Canadian guy wasn't even elevated to Errol Spence's mandatory after beating the guy that was the mandatory, even though that guy, the Canadian, was a PBC fighter. So it would have been a natural fight to make. But, you know, they were just throwing him cash just to shut up and sit in the side to allow Spence to do what he wanted. But now we want to see this guy fight. Let's hope Turki Al-Sheikh offers this guy money so he just fucking steps to the side and moves away, because nobody wants to watch this fucking guy fight. Like, here's the rankings right here. Michael Benson said it. The IBF has now officially ordered Beterbiev to defend his undisputed titles versus Michael Effort next. Yet here you are, Michael Effort, Connor Wallace, Anthony Yard, Albert Ramirez, some fighter from Eastern Europe, Malik Zanad. We saw that guy. He just got knocked out by fucking Bivol, yet he's still ranked number 6. Iman Katsiev. He is a real player, but nobody knows who he is. They should Mike fucking Effort fight him. I guarantee you, Katsiev will knock fucking Effort out. And maybe then people will be interested in seeing Katsiev versus Beterbiev, because what a fucking war that would be. He is basically the Russian version of Mimbili, right? People would love to see Canelo Alvarez fight Mimbili because they believe that maybe Mimbili's aggressiveness and hard punching resilience would fucking upset Canelo Alvarez. Katsiev is the same. Then you got Lyndon Arthur, Callum Smith, who easily would deserve an opportunity to fight Michael Effort. I mean, go fight fucking Callum Smith or Lyndon Arthur or fucking Anthony Yard or fucking Katsiev. You fight one of those guys. Even fight a Dan Aziz, right? A Willie Hutchinson. You fight any of those dudes who are at least known in the UK, have been put on fucking cards in Saudi Arabia, and you beat them. And now it becomes a little more understanding that you could fight that guy. Because now Saudi Arabia would be like, oh yeah, that guy fought great against this guy on that Saudi card, right? Looked really good. Beat a real top fucking 15 IBF contender. So now we could see that being a really good fight. But unfortunately, this guy hasn't fought any of these top 15 guys. Not one. But yet we want to fucking push that. This goes to a video that John Boxing released recently. He was trying to talk about how pound for pound lists today are garbage, and how fighters that are shit are elevated onto these pound for pound lists, even though they haven't fought anyone. All they're doing is chasing titles, right? The irony is, I went back even further. This is the early 90s, right? And I picked these names because it was great, because there's no black American world champion. So I know that JB will hate that, because he thinks obviously it should always be a black American fighter number 1. Right here, I'm sure he thinks Roy Jones and Pernell Whitaker deserve to be in the number 1 position. At the time, I felt they deserved to be in the pound for pound position. I was never a Chavez or Oscar De La Hoya fan. Let's be real. I felt Pernell Whitaker was fucking robbed in that Chavez fight. But this is the rankings. So everything we think, obviously the rankings back then were just as political and just as controversial as they are today. We go down the first one where you have Oscar De La Hoya, like Canelo Alvarez, right? a pay-per-view star who was represented at number one. Why? Because he was one of the most marketable fighters in boxing, brought in the most money. Roy Jones was one of the most skilled, but was never the pay-per-view star that Oscar De La Hoya was. Holyfield, a heavyweight, shouldn't be on the list, but like Usyk, moved up from cruiserweight to heavyweight. So like Usyk was obviously doing great things as well. Trinidad, Mark Johnson, Shane Mosley, right? You know, two Black American fighters, very good. At this point, I think Mosley was there, but I don't even know who he beat. Let's look at who Mosley fought then, before he fought Oscar De La Hoya, to see what he did to really earn him this opportunity to be on this list. Mark Johnson as well. Too Sharp was great, right? But it's ironic because, you know, people want to act like, well, these guys deserve to be on it because I know their names. Even though, what did they do at this point to deserve to be on this list, right? What did they do? Do you know? So Mark Johnson. Mark Too Sharp. Where's Too Sharp? Too many Mark Johnsons. There you are. Too Sharp. I love nicknames. It makes it easier to find them. There he is. 44-5, knocked out 3 times, lost 5, 28 KOs. Was a great fighter. So this was early 90s. So we go back to the early 90s. So let's start in like 91. 91, he just lost. In 90, he lost to a guy who was 5-0. So he'd already lost. Then he moved up. See, at this point, he just started his career in the early 90s. Yet this was like 95 at the most. So he hadn't been around that long. He moved up. Who's the first guy he really fought? The first name. We're now in 95. There's no big names. Huh? What did my phone just do? What the fuck, man? Shut up. What are you doing, man? My phone's having a fucking heart attack. So then in 95, he fought Ernest Sneed, making his debut. So this is a guy who's on a pound for pound list who in 95 made a debut. We keep moving up, seeing who he fought. You know, not until he fought Rafael Marquez. He fought Rocky Juarez. I think that was Rocky Juarez, right? Is that Juarez, who is called Raul Juarez? Maybe it's not. But he fought Rafael Marquez in 2002, 2003, 2001, 2002. Lost both of those fights. Came back, beat undefeated fighter Fernando Montiel, right? The same Fernando Montiel that JB shit on Donaire, beating to be elevated onto the pound for pound list, even though he'd obviously done much more than that. Well, this was the first big name that Mark Too Sharp beat, Montiel. And then he got beat by Ivan Hernandez and Johnny Gonzalez. Like, who did he beat in his career that elevated him on a pound for pound list? Right? But of course, he's American, so we're going to hype him up and make it sound like he deserves to be on that list, even though he never fought anyone. Shane Mosley at this time, I mean, who did he fight? He was fighting a bunch of unknown Mexican fighters in California before he finally beat Oscar De La Hoya. Obviously, it wasn't this time. It was later than this. But he was right there. Ricardo Lopez, considered one of the best small fighters and best Mexican fighters ever. Yet he doesn't have a great opponent in his career. He doesn't have a Francisco. Man, I can't even think. Come on. Well, I can't even think off the top of my head. Who did Roman Gonzalez beat? Estrada, Francisco Estrada. He doesn't have a Francisco Estrada on his resume. He doesn't have a great trilogy with a great elite pound-for-pound quality fighter like Roman Gonzalez does. Yet he's right there at number 7. And he was on John's list as well. Yet John couldn't tell me one fucking fighter Ricardo Lopez fought. Then you got Floyd Mayweather's on this list. Who did Floyd fight at this time? I mean, probably the one big name he fought, which elevated him here, a guy that literally retired after the fight. Prince Nassim Hamed. I'm not sure who he fought at this time, if he'd made his American debut or not. And then Johnny Tapia, right? So you could say there's multiple fighters there that at this point we're on a pound for pound list, you didn't have great resumes, didn't have huge fucking accolades of great fighters on the resumes. Then we moved to the next year. You got Whitaker, Chavez, Michael Nunn. Michael Nunn was great, but who were the great fighters he was beating before he got knocked out by James Toney and then fucking was never heard of again? Antonio Esperanza, hardcores know him, but John doesn't. Meldrick Taylor, great fighter. But what happens? He ended up fucking getting knocked out by Julio Cesar Chavez, never heard of again. Holyfield, Tyson, Raul Perez. John doesn't know who he is. And then you got two Asian fighters. Korean fighter, Myung Woo, and then, of course, Kosei Galaxy. Anyone who's a hardcore fan knows these fighters. Kosei Galaxy was a fucking monster. He was the Golovkin at these bantamweight divisions, right? Knocking out everybody. Had a huge knockout resume, right? But yet, the same criticism John's throwing at fucking Inui and, of course, Nakatani, you probably could say for Kosei Galaxy. And this was back in the early 90s. Let's see what they say, who Kosei Galaxy fought. All I know is I was a big fan of Kosei Galaxy, even though I never got to watch him fight, just because of how he was going about his career, destroying people. See, that's the difference between somebody who's not fanboying somebody that looks like him, but actually is interested in finding the best fighters in boxing. Kosei Galaxy's brother was also a world champion, but obviously not to the extent of him. Kosei Galaxy from 1980 to 1991. There's his resume. 47-1, 41 KOs. He was a fucking monster, right? His only loss coming early on in his career when he lost to a stablemate, a guy that was 2-2 by decision in Thailand in his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th professional fights. And then he went on to destroy motherfuckers. Who's the best name on his resume? Probably nobody anybody's ever heard of, right? His resume is not as good as fucking Inui, not even close. Not as good as fucking Junto Nakatani's. But here he is, number 9 on a pound for pound list. So is this based on racism? Are they only putting this small Asian fighter here because of social media and people pushing Asian fighters onto the list because they're racist against Black Americans? In 1991 or whenever this was, is that what they were doing? And then, of course, you have this other one, Chavez, Whitaker, Terry Norris, Holyfield, Taylor, Riddick Bowe, James Buddy McGirt, Galaxy, James Toney, and Moon still. So you still have those two Asian fighters who are right there. And obviously Tony is there because he just knocked out Michael Nunn, elevating him onto the pound for pound list, right? James Buddy McGirt, why was he there? What was the best win McGirt had at his point of his career? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Americans. So John would love that, right? But literally Tony is on this list because he beat one guy in a fight that he was losing and caught him with a great punch, knocked him out. So that's like saying we should put my man from Australia on the pound for pound list because he beat fucking Teofimo Lopez. That didn't happen because, you know, that would be premature. You need to actually follow that victory up with something significant, right? We know Tony prior to that was getting fucking beat by Roy Jones. But this is just to show the point that throughout history of pound for pound lists, you see the same thing back then that you see today. Tons of smaller fighters are recognized. Asian fighters are recognized. You notice there's not one fucking Eastern European on that list because at that point, Eastern Europe had just opened up after communism, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. John probably doesn't even know what fucking the Berlin Wall is because some people are just plain stupid, right? But prior to that, Eastern Europeans and fucking Cubans did not fight in the pros, right? So I just wanted to debunk his list because he's trying to make a point saying that, oh, look at all these guys on the list. Ricardo Lopez, who I know John doesn't know who Ricardo Lopez is. He knows the name, but he doesn't fucking know. I guarantee you he's never even watched a Ricardo Lopez fight. He's probably even never watched a Salvador Sanchez fight, because why would he? Why would he fight those guys when he fucking hates Mexicans, right? And thinks that Mexicans are inferior to black Americans. So why would he be motivated to even watch those fighters? There. Nicknames are great. Without that, you would never know. So Floyd Mayweather, of course, is great, TBE, because he was 50-0 undefeated. Ricardo Lopez, 51-0, one draw, which was bullshit. Should never have been a draw. 38 KOs, never beaten, never KO'd, right? Great resume. Kind of like that Thai fighter that was 51-0, that never even unified against his other Thai fighter who's currently still a world champion. Right? And of course, the difference between Ricardo Lopez and a lot of these other fighters, these Asians and others, is because he was supported and pushed by Don King. So he was on these Mike Tyson cards, got tons of praise from American boxing pundits, fighting mediocre fucking opponents. Right? We go through his resume and try to find the best fighters he faced. Will Grisby had a draw with Alvarez, technical draw, ended up beating him by split decision in the rematch. Fought a guy who was 7-3, very late in his career. Best guy he fought was probably Ala Velamor, who was 29, 1-1. Right? Velamor retired 29, 2-1, stopped twice. Obviously retired after his loss to Lopez. Prior to fighting Lopez, he was coming off of wins against guys that were 1-3-0, 9-7, 0-3, 5-1-0. So not fighting the toughest opponents available. So we still scroll down trying to find some elite great fighter that he'd faced in his career. Right? You keep scrolling, keep scrolling. Oh, here's a great fighter that he faced. Somebody that hardcore fans know. Hideyuki Ohashi, 9-5, 12 KOs, stopped 3 times. You know who he is? He's fucking a major promoter in Japan. He promotes Junto Nakatani, right? Does he promote Inui as well? So what was his last fight? He fought a 26-0 fighter, ended up losing a majority decision. Fought Ricardo Lopez, was stopped in 5 rounds. Fought a Korean fighter, Chang, who was 35-1. Fought that guy again when he was 31-1, lost to him both times, stopped both times. Fought another Korean fighter who was 8-3-2 by decision. So, fought top-level competition for 4 of his losses, right? Considered a great Japanese fighter. But once again, here's your point. So you don't know who Ricardo Lopez is. Apparently, pound-for-pound lists back then were not political, were not racist, weren't just trying to subjugate the black American fighter. Yet, I showed you that the lists are exactly the same. The only difference is probably now the fighters actually have had to do more to fucking earn recognition than they did back then, right? Junto had to become a 3-weight world champion and now is on the precipice of moving up to face pound-for-pound fighter Inui in his 4th weight division. Inui moved up 4 weight divisions, became undisputed, moved up 5 weight divisions, won titles in 4, and has become undisputed in 2, and beat an unbeaten, unified American champion in the process, but yet he's still garbage, hasn't proven himself, doesn't deserve to fucking be recognized as one of the best fighters in boxing today. See, this is the problem. Some people only see everything racial. They will try to fucking make anything about race. And once again, you can easily fucking debunk them because in truth, they just don't know fucking anything about boxing. But leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about today's show. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. And I will see you next time. Peace out.